as a very successful founder, you've learned a lot of lessons. And if you could go back in time and be a VC again, or if in the future you decide to do that, and I know you make a lot of different types of investments. So if you were to put on the VC hat, knowing what you know now as a very successful operator and business builder, what would you do differently? How would you be a better VC, and what lessons can you teach to other VCs?
Yeah. So, the framework we've always used is kind of like, what's the size of the market? How much is it growing? What's the product market fit and where is it in that journey? What are the reasons to believe it's going to be faster, better, or cheaper? And we used to use our heuristic was it had to be an order of magnitude faster, better, or cheaper. And does it have the right team? And I think what I've underweighted in the past, but would way overweight now, is does it have the right team? Because the right team, Zach, is going to figure it out. That's for me the biggest learning. It's so funny. Doing super early stage investing, and most of the stuff never ends up working, to some stuff works and it works really big, to like operating a terrestrial tangible business that's like taking care of cats and dogs, like couldn't be farther away. I remember when I left VC, I was like, I just want to sell shit I know people want to buy. And like as I've grown, like what gives me joy, it's like you don't have to be good at these crazy things to create a tremendous amount of value. And that's, I think, the red herring that a lot of operators and investors kind of go after, chase the shiny object, as you described. You just have to be the best at the basics. And you know what? That's 98% of what you do every day. Do you get up in the morning? Do you work out? Do you do the things you have to do to be successful? And if you're not, how do you do those things? And that's like, as an operator, like that's the thing I've learned. It's not rocket science. It's about discipline. And humility, but mostly discipline.
So I've got a couple of thoughts to just kind of sum up what I think I've learned. It is super simple. One is solve a problem and be helpful, right? Like number one, like don't invent a product because you think some idiot's going to buy it. Invent a product because it's solving for a real need. It's providing something that actually needs to be there that isn't there yet, right? In other words, it's a product that's actually helpful to society, right? That's my first thing, right? Because now there's going to actually be demand for it, real demand over the long term, because you're adding value, right? So you could call that solving a problem, you could call it being helpful, you could call it adding value. So that's number one, right? Number two that you nailed is basically be resourceful. Figure it out, because things are going to change and there's no training that's going to teach you how to build an innovative company with all the millions of variables and decisions you're going to have to make, right? So that number two is be able to be resourceful, adaptable, flexible in your thinking. Ultimately, just be very, very resourceful. Just be able to figure it out. It's that simple. And then last but not least, for successful founders, is never quit. Because everybody's always going to quit when it gets hard. Not everybody, 99.99% of people. And the 0.01% that don't quit, those are the people that you want to be. Those are the people that wind up achieving these great things that everybody wants to emulate. But they don't realize that those people went through the same shit as the unsuccessful people. They just handled it differently.
It's really another way to frame it. It's actually like a beautiful lesson to whoever's might be listening to us, Zach, is like at the end of the day, you are the commander of your destiny. Like you come up with a million reasons why it's not going your way, there are things that are out of your control, but to add value, be durable, and be gritty, those are all within your control. And I love the way you framed it. A way I like to think about it, that look, I'm in an industry that many veterinarians are called, and caregivers, I would say, to sort of like a different calling, right? They're doing it not necessarily for financial outcomes. The value rubric in their mind is like care. And so if you take a step back, the way I communicate with them is, at the end of the day, the profitability of a business is correlated with the value you're creating. Like profit is just a proxy for value. on this kind of like be resourceful, this hits center to the theme we're talking about around innovation. Like, if you think about it, the only thing that's constant is change. The world is changing all around us, and our ability to survive as humans is contingent on our ability to innovate faster than the world changes around us. And so for me, innovation is actually about survival. And it's survival of humanity. Like, the world's gonna get warmer. Maybe we're causing it, maybe we're not. Who really fucking knows? But we got to survive and figure out, either get to Mars or figure out a way to survive in these kind of like extreme temperatures, or slow the change down. I don't know, but if we can't figure out how to innovate faster, we're gone. And this idea of like being gritty. I think if you are not gritty, or when you're hard, let me say it this way. When you go through hard things, whether you're cycling in the Italian Alps or climbing a mountain, or being in the military, building a company, whatever it is, that's an opportunity to figure out who you really are. And you have choice in that. You're not going to die when you get hungry. Like, probably have to wait like 14 days or something, or 21 days to die before you get hungry. But I hear people like, I'm so starving, I can't handle it. And by the way, I'm guilty of that too. But like, if I take a step back, I'm like, I'm not actually going to die. Can I hold this feeling lightly? And what am I learning about myself? I think there's information.
I think we have a lot more control over our destinies than we realize. And in the sense that we are two things. We are what we think about, and we are some of the decisions we make. And both of those are in our control, right? Literally, what we think about and the decisions we make are in our control. And if there's things outside of your control, then you shouldn't trouble yourself worrying about it. Just, in other words, think positively, and then make good decisions, and you're going to end up probably where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. And that compounds.
Yes, exactly. I think a lot about this idea of path dependence. Like, when I talk to younger people in a mentoring capacity, they'll often say, what do I need to do to be successful 20 years from now? And it all starts with making good decisions early, because there are paths you can go down that are impossible to dig out of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or very, very hard. And it starts, you could think of it even in a simple context of working at an investment bank, and you show up in the analyst class on day one. You're a bunch of 22-year-old analysts fresh out of undergrad, and those that screw up in the beginning don't get the same opportunity set that those that perform well in that first week or month or quarter. Those that perform well initially get the choice assignments. They get handed more responsibility. They get to work with the better senior bankers, for instance, and that compounds over time. And 2 years down the road, the person that did well on day one might be going to work for a top tier private equity firm, and the person that screwed up on day one or early on might be out of the business, even if they were more talented or potentially harder working than the other person. It won't matter, because everything is path dependent. Not everything, but many, many things. And in a career, probably more so than other areas of life, I think.
Totally. I did want to talk about for a second, again, having been on both sides of the investor and the operator equation, what I've come to appreciate, the dynamic. Look, I think people's natural dispositions, they don't like others to hold them accountable, and I get it. It's uncomfortable, but fundamentally, that's the purpose of the board you design. As far as I'm concerned, the function of the board is to hire and fire and compensate the CEO. That's it. That's what the board is designed to do. Now, I think some private equity firms in particular, get attracted to the notion of operational engineering. And I think there may be some places to add value there, but you got to be careful. If you're coming from a world of never having operated an operating company, even if you've seen a lot of them, the example I like to use is the Titanic and the captain. Every pattern that captain recognized was actually what led to its downfall. It's very different, right, in certain environments, and you've got to be open, curious, and sensitive to that. So I'd be careful, like as an investor, getting too deep in the operations. If you don't like what you see, get a new CEO and do that quickly. what I wish I had known as a CEO that I've come to learn now over time, and it didn't really matter because I haven't been fired yet as a CEO. But what is like what the business needs, or a founder, frankly, like what the business needs might be different at different points in its maturity than what I'm able to give or what I want to give, frankly. Like what has drawn me, and I imagine many other entrepreneurs like yourself, to be entrepreneurial may not be the same things that it needs when it's hit that step function improvement. Now, what I'm appreciating is like, because of the attraction to do the hard things, because of the willingness to learn and grow, that's, you know, that's sort of, for me anyway, served. And I'm curious about when, you know, I tap out or when it makes sense. But I sort of wish I'd known that at the beginning, and like truly know it. It's one thing to know it, I think, in your head, and it's another thing to know it in your heart. But I think as for any entrepreneur, like who's thinking about building a business, like, you know, just because you made the business, like you don't control the business. Like the business, you know, has your fingerprints all over. It's like a child. Like you actually don't control your children. And I have 3 of them, and I'm learning that, you know, sort of the hard way. And it's hard and it's beautiful at the same time.
And remind me, what sports did you play growing up?
Yeah. So I played hockey and lacrosse, and I'm glad you asked, actually, because starting to play hockey with my son, who when he started the season was the worst on the team because he started like a little bit later than some of the other crazy hockey parents had their kids start. But he's playing every single day. After we're done playing, him and I play on the ice at night, like after the fact. And I realized like my 30 years of playing hockey wasn't about me going to the Olympics or playing in the NHL or whatever, you know, childhood fantasy or parental fantasy you have for your kids that you project on them. It was really about being able to invest in the relationships that matter to me, and find meaning in that. And I just, like, on the ice the other night, I imagined myself like we were just him and I. It was open, you know, we're up in Maine, and so it's cold up here, so we have an outdoor rink and under the lights in the winter. And like I almost cried thinking about like 40 years, you know, I can see myself playing with my son when he's a dad. And that's my love language, Zach, is playing, right? Going to the gym, having fun. Like that's how I express connectedness. And yeah, it's been awesome. So anyway, that's the answer to your question.
The reason I was curious is because I was thinking about, you know, my upbringing. I played basketball and I was a point guard for years, and pretty good. And you know, this idea of not being able to control outcomes, it's very similar to being a good point guard, right? Because you can have a lot of influence on the game, and you know where everybody's supposed to be, and you know the playbook, and you've got the ability to heavily influence the outcome. But there's just too many things outside of your control. Like you cannot control whether you're going to win or lose the game, and how, you know, how it's going to turn out. Really, it's but you can shape it, right? You can influence it immensely. You know, and so that's why I was thinking people that have played sports, you know, oftentimes make better leaders, better CEOs, better managers, because they intuitively understand that, even if they've never really articulated it or thought about it and how it relates to business. Like they're used to being able to influence and lead others by example sometimes, and sometimes by you know, other means, but they know that there's so many other factors at work and people they have to rely on to get the outcome that they want, right?
So I couldn't agree more. I was a goalie, by the way, in hockey. And so I think back on like a 10-year-old, everybody's watching you. I can't win the game, right? I can't score a goal. I mean, I could, but it's like, I don't know any goalies who scored a goal, other than maybe an empty net. But like even then, I think of a handful of times in like the thousands of games of which I'm aware. And so really it's like, to your point, you can influence it, but you can't. And the ability to deal with the stress you must have dealt with as a point guard, and me as a goalie, has to have had influenced our ability to lead under pressure and stress. And I couldn't agree more. There's so many lessons in sports that like influence our ability to manage teams, manage risk, have a desire to win, understand what execution and discipline actually look like. Like, wow, incredibly valuable lessons.
tying that back to investing, and I've talked about this before as well, I think the founders that are most successful are those that have a demonstrated footprint of success in tough situations. And so that could be athletes, it could be military veterans, it could also be, you know, diverse founders, whether, you know, women or people of color, that don't necessarily have the same, you know, access or support, and so they've had to overcome so much just to get to their current position.
So I got a
Right.
stat for you.
Yeah.
2/3 of American presidents, something like that. I heard this the other day. Uh, Either lost a parent or somebody really close to them in their life. In other words, to your point, the people who have actually gone through something really, really hard, like that is a prerequisite for success, to be comfortable in the hard situation, to your point, to do what you need to do. Because man, to build a company, change an industry, build a fund, it is way fucking harder than you could ever imagine. And I'll have you questioning yourself, your worth, at some point.
You know, the way I think about it is I'm not doing it for anyone else. I'm just seeing if I can do it for myself. I just want to know how far I can go. And so I don't really give a shit what people say about me, quite frankly. It's like, I don't know if you've seen this Deion Sanders clip on like Instagram. That's hilarious.
No.
He's like, look at me. What about me makes you think I give a shit what you think about me? Right. Like that, it's basically, you know, that's kind of how I think founders need to be. You have to go out and say, I'm going to do this because I believe in it. And I don't really care how many doubters there are, because there's going to be many, many, many more doubters and many more no's than yeses. Right. I mean, I think about all the no's I've gotten in my life since I've, you know, built out ARI, and it's, you know, I probably get 99 no's for every yes. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'll tell you, I'd rather get a hard no than a maybe or a fake yes. So I don't even mind getting a no. I mean, the way I think about it is the work doesn't even start till I hear no. Right. I mean, that, I forget who told me that. There was a guy, it was back in the day, but there was very good bond salesman. And I remember who it was. I'll leave him unnamed for now, but very good bond salesman. He said, I don't even really start working until the client says no. Then I start working on them. Right. And I thought, man, that's a good way to think about it. Because a lot of people hear no and they shut down. And they're like, oh man, I'm going to go home with my tail between my legs. Like, you ever go out to, like, back when we were younger and single, go out to a bar, talking to women. Yeah, there's always guys in the group that, like, they hear a no and they're like done for the night. They're like, I'm going home. Like, you know, they just tap out. They can't hear no. They're weak, right? And then there's guys that are like, I'm going to talk to every girl in here so I'll get a yes. Right? I mean, I think that's yeah, that's an analogy for life, right? For success in life. Like, you're going to hear so many no's, and it could be for any reason. And there's no reason to even like think about why you're getting the no a lot of the time. I mean, sometimes it's good to contemplate why so you can improve potentially, but a lot of times it's just a no for some reason. It has nothing to do with you, right?
um, you know, in that vein, I love that the work doesn't start till you hear no. For me, like the biggest naysayer actually could be yourself. Like, I can't do this. My heart rate's, you know, way too high. Lactic acid's burning. You know what? 99.9% chance you are not going to die. And you can keep doing that when you're on the Peloton, when you're riding, when you're running, when you're building a company. Um, I love that. Have you ever seen 14 Peaks? Nims Persia?
Yeah, yeah.
So I got three fillings this morning, Zach. One of them fell out, and the dentist thought it was a good idea to do them all. So I was like, all right, let's go. And I think it's been a while. So for me, so I laid down there and I watched 14 Peaks while this was happening, and he's talking to the team about to go up K2, which was totally demoralized. Everybody at advanced camp had like tried to get there, and they came back, and weather was changing, and nobody believed. And he's like, "Fuck it, we're gonna do it." He said something to everybody. He's like, "When you think you're fucked, you're like 45% fucked. You're not really fucked. You're fully more." And I think that's honestly, like, the more you can appreciate that, the better.
Great words of wisdom.
I did want to talk about venture debt just for a minute too. I mean, I just as an asset class, like particularly in a world where, look, I like to drink wine, and when I've talked to some vintners, and some of the best wines, they actually restrict the amount of water that goes to the trees. And people, no, you're gonna kill it. Nope. And when you restrict the resource, and this is like just like we're talking about, building companies, like this is kind of a way and an approach, I think, to actually build a better, more disciplined company that appreciates the value of cash flow. Like when money's zero, like you will produce bad outcomes. Like if I'm a venture investor now, I almost want the company to have debt on the balance sheet because then it has automatic accountability. And I think venture debt is an asset class, like debt general earlier in the business life cycle of business for us. We did it through a regional bank, and it was still kind of free money, so it doesn't really count. I think we would have been better off if we had money that there was actual element of accountability, and like we would have to make better operational decisions as we go, and implementing that discipline earlier in a business, I think is just better for. Otherwise, it's not a business, right? It's a project. Until you are cash flow positive, you are not a viable going concern. Full stop. Like maybe you could be, but the deceiver in me like went to that place. Oh, I could cut costs whenever I want. It turns out it's fucking hard to cut costs because you have to let go of relationships that you have that, what are they going to think? And they're my friends. And no, can you actually control cost right now? To your point, it's a journey. Like, no, at some point in the future, bullshit. Can you do it now? Now it's nice when you got a story and the potential for disruption for like a massive industry. Like, yeah, that's like 1 in 100,000, maybe. Like if those are the businesses you're funding, that's a problem. Like I would actually not be surprised to see is like in this next kind of cohort of kind of early stage companies that need venture financing to actually take more of an open view to debt. First of all, it's less expensive in many cases. And second, as like an operator, it institutes a tremendous amount of discipline because it's not just about yourself being disciplined. Like as a leader of a business, you got to get the whole team to do what you need them to do. And if right, like the boats are burning in the fucking, Caribbean, like there's one way back home, right? You got to go through Tenochtitlan. And guess what? There are a lot of Aztecs. And so there's one way.
I love that story.
Huge proponent of it. Huge proponent of it. And to the extent you can combine it with equity to the extent business is needed, I think even better. But I think it'll be a much more meaningful part of businesses, particularly as we move away from overweighting on growth to properly weighting on the value of cash flow today.
And that's a much better fit for businesses that are producing revenue and cash flow. It's not really a good fit for the historical growth focused, high cash burning, wannabe unicorns. Those are good for equity investors that are just like, look, I know 95 to 99% of these are going to be zeros or something close to that, but I'm going to make 100 bets and a couple of them are going to turn out big, hopefully. Those types of companies are not a really good fit for debt, as you know. But I think a lot of people kind of get it twisted, and because the capital markets have been so accommodating for fundraising for the last 10 years or so, especially the last 5, it's really distorted people's perceptions on what an optimal capital structure looks like for all types of companies, but particularly I think startups. And I think that's starting to come back to reality in a sense, but it's taking some time. I mean, it's one of the things I'm actually thinking a lot about is why do founders not really understand debt, given that it can be so helpful to them in terms of financing their company, holding them accountable, but also getting them much cheaper and much less dilutive capital. I mean, why, as a founder, the last thing you want to do is sell equity, especially when you think you've made it and it's going to be worth a lot, right? But they still are very hesitant around debt. And I think part of that's maybe the messaging from VCs, right? So I'm curious what you think. Why do more founders not understand debt and its benefits?
I think a lot of founders aren't super financially oriented. I think the good ones are actually. You got to understand. Look, like Warren Buffett said, it's a language. Accounting and finance is a language of business. Like, if you don't understand that, then you're going to have a hard time optimizing for the desired outcomes. But I think there's a certain group that don't understand that. I think it's scary as well. Like we said earlier, people don't want to be held accountable. Like if you got to make a payment every month, now there's an accountability, right? And then I think there's this historical notion of like debt is sort of scary. But if you have, to your point, if you believe the value of your equity is going to be greater, a lot greater in the future, like why wouldn't you? In fact, why would you sell equity? It doesn't make and control and a preference. And then you get accountability in a different way. Now you get somebody who actually thinks they can operate your business too, a lot of times. And for me, I think being curious and open, like around capital markets innovation, I think is important. Some of the traditional notions are being absolutely tested now. And look, I think some of the BDCs have been some of the best performing asset class from an investor perspective, with limited risk. I think it's a vehicle that I think on both sides ought to get more legs here in the not too distant future. But to answer your question directly, I think people don't understand it super well. It's not traditionally used, but I think people are questioning a lot about what we thought to be true, in the last few years. So, yeah.
So one of the things that I like to do that I think is a great test that equity investors should think about is when you're talking to a founder and they say, well, debt at 15% interest is very expensive. And I say, well, based on your projections, the amount of value that I'm going to save you, in other words, the cash that's going to remain in your pocket, if you even reach your base case projections, is going to be 25 times whatever you paid in interest. And they're like, well, I'd still rather do equity, right? To me, that's a sign that I'm glad I wouldn't lend to that person or that company anyway, right? Because ultimately their projections are bullshit. They're going to get us, they're good at fundraising, but they have no confidence in their ability to actually get to where they're telling you they're going to get to. Because if you truly believe you're going to make this company long-term successful, you would never sell as much equity as you're selling, ever.
100%. A lot of times too with equity, I'll just say it, like for the folks that are good at raising funds, there's a lot of private equity providers, like literally dime a dozen. And a lot of what I've seen, the tactics to win deals, they often juice it for the founder, right? So like more options, more equity, I'll buy so you can take some off the table. They're usually spiffing the founder to like differentiate themselves. And I think you look for a founder who's maybe not been getting market salary or under a lot of pressure. I think that also creates unnatural short-term decisions. I think that's another dynamic at play as well.
100%. So we're just about out of time, and I really appreciate having you on. I've loved the way you think about the world, and I'm glad you're sharing.
Likewise.
So I want to ask you, in terms of your parting thoughts, how do you think investors should think about investing in innovation over the next 3 to 5 years? Given your history as a founder and as a VC and as an all-around thoughtful person, how should they be thinking about accessing innovation as an asset class?
No, it's a great question that can manifest itself in a bunch of different ways. But I think the question I would be asking are, what are the biggest problems that are out there that we know we can solve, and what is no longer serving us, and trying to find those asymmetry. And it's not going to be in the delta 1 effect, might not even be in the delta 2 effect. It's the second and third order effects where I think the most information exists, like what's changing, but what's changing at an accelerating or decelerating rate. In other words, the productive power of an individual has accelerated asymmetrically by virtue of mobile wireless communications, internet technologies. And I think we're going to go through a third leg here with AI. Like the average knowledge worker is going to be a lot more productive. I think that's the theme, from my lens to watch. Another one is sort of for me, like how big is healthcare? $1 trillion market? Like what's changing now that's going to afford people the ability to be stewards of their healthcare and live longer, happier, more meaningful lives. And I go to people, I go to like commercial healthcare where the traditional medical system is not serving people, and nor was it designed to really make us live longer. It was designed to prevent us from dying. And so what are the innovations that are coming in this, like the biggest or second biggest market in the whole entire world, that's going to change? That's another place that, for what it's worth, I'm super compelled by. And then, you know, the last area I'll talk about is how are business models changing, where the fundamental cost structure of delivering a service is changing by virtue of what's available and emerging, like AI. You know, we talked about tangible terrestrial businesses where the fundamental cost structure will change dramatically vis-a-vis what's been the darling the last 20 years, maybe with kind of these toll collecting multi-sided platforms that have been the beneficiaries of at least the first and the second leg of better connectivity and information transfer.
All great thoughts. So, Dan, thanks again for coming on, man. Love seeing you, talking to you.
Likewise. Good to hear your voice, Zach, and good to connect, and really appreciate the time.
Sure thing. And thanks everybody for listening to the 7-7 Show with Zack Ellison. See you next time.